And we're back, episode 9 of the Lantern Sports Podcast, hosted by the Lantern Sports Desk here at The Ohio State University. I'm Stephen Kishpaugh, assistant sports editor to the Lantern. Joining me as always, to my left, we got LTV sports producer Casey Smith. Across from me, we got sports editor Jacob Benge. And then to my right, we got LTV assistant sports producer Gabe Burggraf. Gentlemen, as always, we'll preview the Penn State matchup coming up this weekend in State College. But first, just a quick word around Ohio State athletics. Both the men's and the women's cross-country teams are running in the Big Ten championships on Friday. The women's volleyball team hosts bitter rival Michigan Wednesday at the Covelli Center. And Kylie Murr was named Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week recently. For the women's soccer team, they are seeded 5th in the Big Ten tournament and are set to face Nebraska. It's the first time since 2017 that they've won at least 10 games. And they are currently led by forwards Emma Sears and Kayla Fisher, who both have 8 goals apiece. For the men's soccer team, they celebrate senior night tonight, actually, as they host Michigan State at Jesse Owens Memorial Stadium. They look to maintain their unbeaten streak at home as they currently sit at 6-0-2 on the season. For the number 1 ranked women's hockey team, they host number 2 Minnesota this weekend at OSU Ice Rink. Amanda Thiele was named WCHA Goaltender of the Week, and Jen Gardner was named Forward of the Week. So, guys, it's going to be weird for us this weekend. Only the second road matchup for Ohio State. And then according to the game notes, it's the first time that State College, Pennsylvania is going to host Big Noon Kickoff for a Penn State game. So, there's a lot of stuff to look at this weekend in terms of just storylines and whatnot. But, Jacob, you went to the press availability today, and then what did you hear just around how Ohio State's preparing for this weekend?
Yeah, getting to hear from Ryan Day, Kevin Wilson, Jim Knowles, 2 coordinators as well. It was always pretty fun each week. Really, the big thing for me today was just hearing how Ryan Day has said that, each week is a new season for Ohio State. He's kept the mantra all season about competitive stamina and bringing your A game, so to speak, day in and day out. And he said that, Ohio State is going to have its biggest quarterback and wide receiver challenge of the season this coming weekend against Penn State. So I'm curious how the Buckeyes are going to maybe adjust to Sean Clifford after playing Spetcher Petras against Iowa there on last Saturday, because it's going to be, I think, 2 completely different games there, just talking quarterback play and opposing teams.
Yeah, I mean, when you're going against Spencer Petras and he throws an interception that he just stared down Tanner McAllister on that first play, you're not going to get that with Sean Clifford. He's an Ohio kid. He knows the importance of this recently budding Ohio State-Penn State rivalry because, I mean, you think Ohio State-Michigan, but, Ohio State-Penn State's sort of that number 2 on the back burner rivalry. Sean Clifford hasn't been able to beat him in what feels like his 10-year career at Penn State, Ohio State, they're currently on the longest winning streak ever between the two teams, currently on a 5-game win streak. The last victory, though, 2016, if you'll remember, the blocked punt or the blocked kick, blocked field goal, return for a touchdown, and that sort of was the difference back in 2016 in Penn State's 24-21 victory. A lot of these games have been close. Last year, Ohio State, they were beating the brakes off a ton of their opponents. Obviously, they lose twice, but one of their closer wins was against Penn State last year, 33-24. And, you go down the list. 2020, 38-25. That's only 13 points. 28-17, 11. Then back-to-back 1-point victories for Ohio State in 2017 and 2018. So, these games have really been fairly close, despite Ohio State's sort of offensive outpouring in the other games that season.
And I wanted to mention that you were talking about Gabe was talking about earlier how he believes that Penn State's kind of due for a win. And when you look at these matchups, you kind of think of it almost in like the sense of the Ohio State-Michigan game, where you can kind of see Ohio State, get find a bump in the road and get flustered by a team like Penn State, like they do against Michigan, because they always prepare for Michigan 110% every single year. We know that, because no matter how good they are comparatively to Ohio State, that's the game they want to win. But every single season, it seems like, with Wisconsin kind of being on a downturn and Nebraska not being able to contend in the Big Ten for as long as they've been in it, we've kind of seen, aside from, Michigan State and Michigan, it's been Penn State that's constantly in contention in this just absolutely loaded division in the Big Ten. There's going to have, in my opinion, there needs to be some realignment in the conference once USC and UCLA joined, because clearly there's one side that's holding all the chips, and the other side is just kind of playing for a participation trophy.
Well, one of those sides might get one more chip if UCLA is coming. But in recent memory, it seems like this is one matchup where Ohio State-Penn State has been pretty close. You know, the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, the game, has been a little bit lopsided in terms of score and the differential. But as far back as I can really remember, Penn State, Ohio State, especially going on the road, you think back to those games where they were overtime or they were one-score games. This has the makings of that, but we'll have to see what exactly happens. We thought that potentially Iowa could, kind of control the game in that first half. All they did was shoot themselves in the foot, and Ohio State really just ramped up to second and third gear in the final half and just blew the doors off them. So, establishing the run is going to be crucial in this game. And I'm interested to see what Mayan Williams provides, because he hasn't scored. He didn't score on the road at Michigan State. He hasn't scored on the road yet. 9 scores, 5 of them against Rutgers. So, if they can kind of control the ground and get some yardage, that they had less than 70 yards, I believe 66 on the ground against Iowa. If they can establish that, they can win this game in dominant fashion.
Right, and you bring that up. The big glaring, Penn State, they pick up a big road win at Auburn early in the year, part of that home and home that they had. But then again, Auburn, they had 2 left feet on offense in that game. They've really sort of kind of found their footing and come to their own. But the one game, everybody wants to compare Ohio State to Michigan, and you see a couple weeks ago, Michigan beat the brakes off Penn State. So, you were talking about establishing the run. The key in that game was Michigan had 177 yards and 2 touchdowns from Donovan Edwards. You go to Blake Corum, the starting running back, and there's no real drop-off, 172 yards and 2 touchdowns. If Ohio State's able to do that same thing, because, everybody and their mother is going to compare Ohio State to Michigan, like, oh, Michigan only beat Iowa by X number of points. Ohio State beat them 54-10. So, do you see this little bit of jockeying back and forth until we get that date, November 26th, which is 1 month and a day away, as crazy as that will seem. But, if you think about it, like, Ohio State, they can kind of use that similar formula. And, you have 2 backs at your disposal that both run hard. They both get chunk yards. I think they're averaging, as a combined, like 6.3 yards per carry. So, it's not rocket science.
It's not rocket science. And the thing that interests me about that is that was basically a deadlocked game at the half, Michigan and Penn State, before Michigan really got going. And in that game, Penn State couldn't run the ball.
Mm-hmm. Sean Clifford was the leading rusher in that game.
6 carries, 19 yards for Nicholas Singleton is not going to get it done for them. And the problem becomes you can't sustain drives just with Sean Clifford, because you've seen this secondary play well and, really rebound from the beginning of the year where they let quarterbacks run all over them. They've been pretty tight in the pass game.
And I wanted to just point out that I think Penn State is kind of uniquely in a situation where they can kind of scout Ohio State like it's their biggest game of the year, even though that, they're looking for contention when they're playing Michigan and Michigan State and whatnot. But, they can always look at Ohio State as their biggest game of the year. And there's a lot of connections between Ohio State and Penn State. For example, the redshirt sophomore long snapper Michael Wright and Steele Chambers, 4th-year linebacker for Ohio State. They both played at Blessed Trinity Catholic in Georgia. Penn State's offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, Mike Yursich, served as Ohio State's passing game coordinator and quarterbacks coach in 2019. And then Yursich and Jim Knowles, Ohio State's defensive coordinator, coached together at Oklahoma State in 2018, where they held their same respective titles at Oklahoma State. So there's a lot of connection between Ohio State and Penn State, even though it doesn't look like it on the surface. And I think, like I said, Penn State might be uniquely equipped to, prepare, especially for Ohio State, given all the connections.
And now that we're past the bye, you also have to look. Penn State has that one loss to Michigan. What happens if they beat Ohio State? Ohio State beats Michigan. We have 3 one-loss teams in that side of the division like you were talking about. And we go to the tiebreakers and everything just becomes chaos. That's the thing about Big Ten football is you never know because of the caliber of defense. You saw Iowa in that game with no offense for a half. And they did not deserve to be in that game because the offense was so bad and giving Ohio State possessions. If Penn State doesn't give Ohio State great field position and their defense plays decent, I don't think any of us thinks that their defense is the caliber of Iowa's. But if they can string together some stops, you've got an opportunity if your offense can produce something, which Iowa just couldn't do.
And I wanted to just look at the history of this type of matchup because, these are kind of 2 storied programs, even though they never had, a lot of people claim that Ohio State, Penn State is like a great big rivalry, but, it's never been on the caliber of, an Ohio State, Michigan. But, these teams have played a lot, especially when ranked, but the last, I believe, either 6 or 7 times that they've played each other ranked, because the last Penn State win was unranked, Ohio State's won. And it doesn't matter whether it's been in Happy Valley or whether it's been in Columbus, because Ohio State has just seemed to have Penn State's number except for like an occasional gaffe. Now I will say that, during the late Urban Meyer era when JT Barrett was still quarterback and Dwayne Haskins was quarterback as well, it wasn't as far apart as it is now, where I think Ohio State and Penn State were still kind of like neck and neck in terms of Big Ten supremacy. But now I think that, if they haven't done it in the past couple of years, I don't think there's a very good chance they can do it this weekend.
And you make a good point about Ohio State and Penn State's recent rivalry. And, with Michigan defeating Ohio State last year, I think it's kind of changing the tilt back a little bit. But, I think back to last season's Ohio State-Penn State game, and really we talked about how the score was so close, I believe around a 10-point margin, and really the kicker in that game was Jerron Cage scooping score and a defensive touchdown there to really separate the score there. And, it's kind of an interesting parallel because Ohio State last week against Iowa goes and puts up a season-high turnover-wise defensively. 3 interceptions, 3 fumble recoveries. We talked about how the first play of the game was an interception, and then the first pass of the second half was also an interception. So, personally, I'm curious to see how C.J. Stroud can maybe put together a complete game in both halves if needed, because, as Steven, you were mentioning, Ohio State and Penn State play really close games. I still recall the 2019 matchup, the final home game of the regular season. It was rainy and not the best conditions, and Sean Clifford and Penn State were right there in the shoe. Now this time they're going to be at Beaver Stadium there in State College, and it's also the first time Ryan Day as head coach is going to coach in Beaver Stadium with fans against Penn State. How much of a difference that makes, I'm not sure. He's been with Ohio State long enough to have played there before and coached at that stadium, but not as the head coach.
Yeah, and I mean, could this be like Sean Clifford's sort of breakthrough? I know you can kind of point to how flaky of a quarterback he's been, but you look at his string. He's played Ohio State 3 times. Game 1 was 10 for 17 with 71 yards and a 57.5 QBR back in 2019, and then 2020. A little bit better, 18 for 30, 281 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. And then last year, granted, they were behind, so he had to throw a little bit more. 35 for 52, 361 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. If you get 1 more score, 2 more scores or so, you're winning that ball game on the road in a big fashion. So Sean Clifford, he said earlier today that this Ohio State defense is doing nothing similar to what they've done in the past. It's been very vanilla in the past as opposed to how aggressive they are now under Jim Knowles. Gabe, we were talking earlier about having to establish the run. Travion Henderson had 152 yards in that game with a touchdown. So I think I wouldn't discredit Sean Clifford to this point because I think he steps up sort of in the big moments, and I think he definitely wants to show out against Ohio State. Correct me if I'm wrong, I believe he made some comments last year and came back to bite him about this Ohio State team, so now he's taking a little bit more of a humble approach. But, I mean, I feel like you could see him go for 300-plus. Ohio State, they've been pretty stout defensively in that aspect. So Do you say that he got 361 last year because A, he threw 52 times, and B, the Ohio State pass defense was not as good? Yes, but I feel like they might want to sling it around a little bit and try and put this Ohio State defense on their heels, especially with the number of 50-50 balls these corners have lost this year.
Well, we've seen what happens when you can only run the ball. We saw that last week for about half the game was just Iowa just running the ball because they could not really do anything through the air. I think it's interesting because Sean Clifford, he's played well this season. He's averaging over 200 passing yards a game, which I know with C.J. Stroud, you look at it like those are rookie numbers. But at the end of the day, he hasn't really made that many mistakes. He hasn't thrown that many touchdowns either. 13 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. The one game that really stood out, though, was that Michigan game. He only threw for 120 yards on 7 of 19. That's the thing. If you can get pressure in his face and make him deliver it quick, we saw it last week, a little bit of pressure, a little bit of good disguise from Jim Knowles in the back end. It's going to be tough sledding for Penn State if they don't establish both the pass and the run early, because if you can get some quick screens out, get him comfortable, that's when things really build into that environment. They are striping out the field, I believe. They're not asking everybody to wear stripes, but they're basically designating certain sections to be white or blue, which is kind of weird in my opinion. I thought, the crew where you have both colors, but if you can kind of disorient Ohio State and make them play rushed and hurried, you're going to be able to settle in there offensively and basically do whatever you want. Now, you might not be able to do that on this defense compared to last year's Ohio State defense, but it's all about managing the game for Sean Clifford, I feel. He can make a play or two when he needs to, but we really haven't seen that from him this year when he needed to.
Right, and I believe the question becomes, is this Ohio State team built to play at Beaver Stadium? I mean, Michigan State, they were loud for a little bit, but then that kind of thinned out once Ohio State, they come back after the pick six and C.J. Stroud throws a quick touchdown to Emeka Egbuka and silenced them. So do you think Ohio State's able to do that again?
Let's see. Well, when looking at Penn State's offense, Ohio State, I think, is going to score a minimum of 28 points. That's just the baseline minimum, in my opinion, that I think Ohio State can score this weekend. It's up to Penn State's offense to keep up with Ohio State's offense because, their defense, it's great. It's a great defense. In the Big Ten, their passing defense is they only give up 232.9 yards per game, which is not very good nationally, but that's still decent in terms of this era of pass-happy offenses. But they're just going to have to use explosive plays on offense and to keep up. And, they have a decent way of doing it. Their explosive play percentage on offense is 14.44%, which is 4th in the Big Ten. You could probably take a wild guess as to who the first in the Big Ten is. But they are able to generate explosive plays on offense. And Ohio State hasn't really faced a team that, let's not beat around the bush. Iowa is no good offense. That was putrid football that we watched. But Penn State, and no offense to Iowa at all, but Penn State is more explosive than Iowa. I think the receivers are better. Their offensive line might not be as good, but I think, with the experience of Sean Clifford and just being able to spread out the field more than Iowa was, I think they do have a chance of staying in the game, but it's really up to that defense to limit Ohio State's offense because I think, like I said, I think they're scoring at least 28.
Well, do you want a nugget, Steven?
Oh, I do like nuggets, Gabe.
Okay, so where do you think Penn State ranks in terms of third down conversions? Because if the defense can't keep up with Ohio State's offense, and this becomes a game where Penn State's going to have to, one way or another, outscore Ohio State to win this game.
I actually
yes, percentage-wise.
Okay, so the way you're saying it, I'm going to say something bad. I'm going to say 38%.
35%. 12th in the Big Ten on third down conversions. And we know this Ohio State defense has gotten off the field pretty good this year. If that continues to trend the way it's been trending, it's going to be a tough afternoon on the gridiron in Beaver Stadium.
And I looked up that stat because I couldn't believe it. Their third down defensive percentage, so the amount of Like you guys know, you guys are smart. 33.6. So that's a difference of 1.6% on offense and defense. For Ohio State, 52.4% conversions on third down on offense, 24.5% defensive third downs. So I think, just by that metric alone, we can see like kind of the big gap in terms of play calling in crucial situations. Third down arguably is always called the most important down because of just field position and, advancing the ball, all the football fundamentals. And if Penn State is able to have an unusual game on offense where they are able to convert these third downs, then they do have a chance. But, it's college football. Anything can happen. But, the trend shows that they might not be able to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, you bring up a good point about the third down numbers there. I'd take a look at the red zone numbers. Ohio State's been perfect inside the red zone and scoring opportunities there. They've scored more touchdowns than field goals, obviously, and we got to see Noah Ruggles there showcase himself there last week with 4 field goals. But, Ryan Day talked a lot about this past week how the Iowa game was pretty different just in terms of the first half versus the second half, just with all the turnovers. Ohio State would get the ball in plus territory, and Iowa territory a little bit of quicker speed there to the red zone. And versus like when C.J. Stroud gets the football and then he looks at his offense and says, how much time do you have? But, Ohio State showed last week that it can still, finesse a little bit, whether it's on the opponent's side of the field or its own side of the field. But I'm curious to see if Penn State can maybe break Ohio State's perfection there in the red zone this weekend.
For me, last week, a couple predictions in here were dead on. Defensive touchdown, Tommy Eichenberg interception. The way I think Penn State stays in this game is they've got to be disruptive on the defensive end. That's the way we thought Iowa would come out, and they did. They got that strip sack early on to take the lead in the first quarter. Penn State's forced 8 fumbles this year, which is tied for third in the Big Ten, over 1 a game. They're going to have to disrupt this Ohio State offense, maybe with a couple stunt blitzes, something just to get C.J. Stroud a little bit out of his element. But at the end of the day, that offense is that offense. And that's the thing. It's interesting to me that Ohio State, when facing that Iowa defense, wasn't able to really punch it into the end zone that great when they were gifted those opportunities and they had short fields to go. And you wonder the spacing and everything of this offense and if they can run the ball in the red zone. Because they got down there and they were really, it seemed, at least in my opinion, they were throwing it all over the yard, trying to go for that big play or just get chunk plays, and it just wasn't working in the first half until they stretched that defense in the second half. We'll have to see if this Penn State defense is able to do that. Because this is a game, if it's a score or two, a field goal instead of a touchdown could be the difference between a win and a loss.
Right, and you look at guys like Joey Porter Jr. and Jair Brown for that Penn State defense. I mean, they're sort of holding it down there in the back end. And, I mean, you look at some of the analytic numbers, Ohio State's offense, other than starting field position, ranks top 10 in all the analytical different categories. On defense, I mean, they rank top 3 in everything except for percentage on first and second down, sort of that success rate, and then also a measure of quality possessions and opportunity creation. That's all I can give you. That's the description they gave me. But I mean, analytically speaking, and just raw by the numbers, this Ohio State team, top to bottom, I mean, but it's because of the composition they're playing. It's sort of like you have the first, 90 or so picks on the playground, and the other team's just kind of reeling with the scraps that's left. So that's sort of you can only play who's on your schedule, but Ohio State's really taking advantage of some inferior opponents. And I think we'll get sort of this first test this weekend, especially on the road, what this Ohio State team can do.
And we've talked about this time and time again. Where's the offense that's really going to rival Ohio State's and kind of balance the scales between defense and offense? We know Ohio State's offense is incredible, and the defense has played well, but when are they going to get tested by an actual competent offense? Whether that's against Michigan, whether that's at Maryland, whether that's in Indianapolis, probably not. And like you said, with a top 4 team that they have to figure it out against, it probably won't be this week.
The big thing is Jim Knowles says he doesn't want to have to figure it out. He wants the defense to be on go mode from snap 1 to snap 70 or how many ever plays the opposition's running. So he doesn't want that switch to have to get flipped. So he wants it top to bottom, flying around the ball, playing aggressive, as Sean Clifford, of all people, has taken a note of.
All right, so it's going to be a fun trip for us this weekend, I think. 5-hour drive to State College. But, I think it'll be fun to watch. It'll be most of our first time in Beaver Stadium with fans in it, minimum. Yeah, it's going to be fun, but the spread is 15.5, boys. And after Jacob got his prediction last week, he's inspired me to start doing prop bets. So I think Ohio State wins this game, and I think they do cover, but it'll be closer-ish than people think. I'll go with Ohio State 30, Penn State 20. 38-20, sorry. 38-20. Goodness gracious.
38-20 for Steven, okay.
Yes, correct. Put that on the record. And Emeka Egbuka, punt return touchdown.
I'll give Casey the floor today so that he takes my pick instead of me taking his like normal.
So Ohio State, like I mentioned before, it's been close against Penn State, considering. You look at a lot of these games, and it's sort of like, what's that spark play going to be? And sort of that spark play last week, even though Ohio State was controlling the game, even though I think it was 33-10 when the bomb to Julian Fleming happened. But that was sort of that spark play where you're like, all right, this Ohio State offense, they score 2 more touchdowns. Good night and good luck. So I think that spark play is going to be Travion Henderson, 65-yard touchdown, and Ohio State, they win. They cover 42-17.
That's crazy. RB1 with your prop bet today.
Mm-hmm.
Good choice.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, back to the famous score predictions, prop picks. We got it all. Feeling good this week. We were talking a little bit earlier about how, Ohio State and Penn State have played very close in this series, and then, the Michigan and Penn State game from a few weeks ago was brought up, and, how close it was at halftime between the Wolverines and Nittany Lions, and then, of course, the final score rests there at 41-17, and we talked about the 15-point spread. Well, fellas, I think the spread is really 24. Michigan beats Penn State by 24. Ohio State has to one-up that, of course. I've been saying all season that Ohio State has to score 40 points. And so I'm going to go with that this week. I'm going 49-14 Ohio State. This Ohio State team's different than most Ohio State teams in the past when it plays Penn State, and I think we'll see that. I'm curious how the road environment with fans at Beaver Stadium impacts Ohio State. It's truly its second road game of the season, and so it's a lot more tougher than Michigan State. But Ohio State does its thing yet again. Moves on to Northwestern next week. But they still got Penn State on Saturday. If you want a prop pick, Cade Stover. It's been 4 games. He's going to get a touchdown. Ohio State's going to work its tight ends a little bit more this game, I think. And if you want a little bit more for that prop pick, it's going to be on an end around. I recall Garrett Wilson's end around in 2020, a big play. So Cade Stover's been lining up out wide a little bit this season. How about a little end around play? Maybe for a touchdown, maybe not, but look for them both this Saturday.
Jacob, you'll get great odds on that because he is not a speedster. In the scouting report, he's not a speedster. So you might get some. If that hits, you won't be on this podcast next week.
Jacob will be retired down in Florida.
By Twitter.
Chomp, chomp.
Interesting. So everybody here has said they will cover, correct?
Yes, correct.
Who was the one person who said last week that Ohio State would not cover, Gabe?
Me.
That is on
Are you saying the same thing this weekend?
The thing is, I want to say, like I said, Penn State's due to at least have a shot in this game. That being said, Iowa just gave up 54 points with Ohio State's offense really only being the main thing for Ohio State and propelling them in the second half. They gave up 54. The most points a Ferentz team has ever given up. That being said, I'm going to say this is a gruel-it-out game. Eventually it's going to hit, and it's going to be, what puts me over all these other 3. I think this is a game where Ohio State dominates the game, and there's just a last-second infusion with the second string in. I think there's let's say, 38-24 Ohio State with hopefully some rain.
Aren't you on the field for the game? Why do you want rain?
I am. Because I think that will make it that will increase the stakes of this game. I think a lot of people expect and basically know that Ohio State should win this game. And if you introduce an uncontrollable variable, then the mighty can fall.
All right, just one final nugget for the thinking fan out there. If you want rain, it's not going to play in Penn State's favor. Their expected points added per rush is already 101st in the country at negative .06 points per rush. So factor in the rain, that might hurt him a little bit more.
Well, it also might hurt Stroud if he's not throwing the ball on target, like happened in the first half against Iowa. He's going to have that Beaver Stadium crowd, and if it is anything other than bright sunshine at noon for the big noon kickoff, it is going to be loud and crazy in there.
Well, I think that'll do it for episode 9 of the Lantern Sports Podcast. This is a lot of content. I think we'll have a fun car trip to and back this weekend. But for Casey Smith, Jacob Benge, and Gabe Burggraf, I'm Stephen Kishpaugh, and we'll see you in the next episode.